Welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Thompson along with multiple partners in crime. We are able to commit much larger crimes now. Aaron, how are we doing, sir?
I'm doing great, but let's get on to these other handsome guys that are here. Nobody's here to see me.
For anyone who is not enjoying the Hoof every Tuesday night and so many other fun things, Sterling Furrowh. Sterling, how are we doing, my man?
I'm good, man. I'm just here for one person tonight.
Our fans are fantastic. We've already got people in the chat. It's going to be an awesome night. Anthony Prohaska, host of Disguised Coverage, co-host of the Cover One Fantasy Show, strong contributor to the Film Room. How are we doing?
Workhorse.
Oh, yeah, and recently denoted the workhorse of Cover One.
Thank you. Please address me properly and appropriately by that workhorse title. I'm doing good. I got confused for Anthony Romeo today. On Twitter for some stuff about Baker Mayfield, Greg, that you decided to co-sign because you hate me. But it's been a good day.
I did enjoy that, if it's any consolation.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a little bit of fun tonight going through kind of a roundtable discussion of 53-man projections. We're going to be able to put some things together to make sure that we'll talk through each of yours. We'll act like a front office. We're going to try to set up what we think these discussions are going to be like. And as we get into this, there's going to be a lot... we appreciate it. Yeah, with Partners in Crime, we can have a serious heist with these. We could do some serious work. We appreciate you, Matt. We're going to go through and try to have the kind of discussion that we think is happening at One Bills Drive, and that, Brandon Beane, Joe Shane, Malik Boyd, Lake Dawson, they're going to be sitting there. They're going to be having Sean McDermott and Brian Daboll and Leslie Frazier coming in and each lobbying for their guys to be able to figure out who makes this roster. And we're going to try to have those kind of discussions. So we're going to do it position group by position group as we go through. But before we quite get into that breakdown, obviously, a big impact on that is who's going to be eligible to make the roster because they're healthy. We'll start with you, Aaron. I know, it started out with obviously some of the close contact issues that were going around. Then we had the practice collision between Jordan Poyer and Isaiah McKenzie. Then we heard some things about Taron Johnson in a cast. We saw Levi Wallace off to the side. Just... There's a whole lot going on. We'll start tonight's show by saying I don't think we have a ton of formal reporting or information.
Right.
But so I'm going to take that so far as I don't believe there's concern of like season ending stuff, but we also don't know that some of it might not last into the season. So, so much information coming at us at once. Aaron, what was your first thoughts on how to handle this as we get into this cut down?
Yeah, get into the fetal position and just cry it out. It was a tough day. It was a tough couple days here for Bills fans in terms of injury news, and especially since we didn't hear anything official from Sean McDermott. I don't think we're going to get an official update here until tomorrow. So that's concerning. I think for this practice tonight, we just assume health of all these players for the 53, and like you said, not long-term issues, but there's going to be a bunch of probably YouTube commenters that get the actual injury news tomorrow when they listen to this and they'll be like, you idiots, so-and-so is her and they're out on the IR. So but for this exercise, I think we have to assume. But yeah, no, I think it goes to show you that, we were flying high for about 4 to 6 weeks about how deep this team is and how great this Super Bowl run is going to be. But then you see Dane Jackson getting an MRI, Levi Wallace having a hip injury. That position gets thinned out real quick. Obviously, wide receiver thins out with the COVID contacts real quick. And then McKenzie's hurt. Now you're bringing guys in. So in the NFL, no matter how deep you are, you got to, this is something Brandon Beane's always doing a really good job of, is kind of scouring the league, looking at that bottom of the roster, always trying to get that build up, that depth, because this is where it matters, guys. And hopefully this is the hump that they have to deal with early on and get over. And this isn't something that leaks into the season, but definitely a tough couple of days on Twitter for Bills fans, especially without having any confirmed knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah. So Sterling, as you kind of evaluate this, did you take some of these into account as far as, we saw the trickery last year where Andre Roberts was asked to politely wait in the parking lot while they kept Isaiah Hodgins on the roster and then put him on IR. We saw two of the moves, unfortunately, already with Duke Williams and Forrest Lamp for all intents and purposes, ending their seasons, there is potential of the injury settlement where they could play for somebody else. How do you approach things like this when it's so close to the cut down?
I think you got to look at the areas of emphasis that they're going to focus on. I think those are in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. I think that's where you're going to see some of the trickery, right? I think Justin Zimmer has a case. I think, unfortunately, they like Vernon Butler a little too much. And you look on the offensive line, Ryan Bates is an intriguing name. Bacher, those are guys that can do multiple things. So I think you're going to see some trickeration from Brandon Beane in terms of the trenches.
And Anthony, before we dive in, as you kind of take a look at the way that they have what Aaron touched on, some of the depth in some of the areas versus some of the, pretty clear-cut ones, in my opinion, how did that factor in as far as maybe keeping an extra person in a spot where you may not have, because now you might need that depth early on, versus maybe cutting somebody that in a vacuum, those two guys, maybe this one's better, but you need that position more now because of the injuries?
That definitely played a role in my decision-making coming into tonight, and I think it really tied almost hand in hand with, some of the things we've already spoken about here and things we're seeing in the chat, that whole gamesmanship aspect of let's cut this guy, but we're really going to bring him back right away, like we did with Andre Roberts and Dean Marlowe. And then when you add the injury pieces on top of it, that further impacts and has a role in the whole depth argument and overall roster construction. So it definitely played a role. I think, I went into this exercise thinking it would be fun, and it was, but with all of the gamesmanship aspects and the things we'll get into, it got to be pretty difficult for several of these positions, because there's a lot of avenues and paths in which we could go down for so many reasons and in so many ways.
Well, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to put my Brandon Beane hat on. I'm going to invite in Shea Tierney and Ken Dorsey and Brian Dable. We are going
to be Dable because I have the Dable haircut.
Bald head. It's already a perfect fit. We're going to debate, obviously, the most difficult of the position groups to discuss is going to be quarterbacks.
I just want to be a middle-aged white man, so...
Trust me, you don't. I have a lot of experience at it.
Dude.
Let's start with quarterbacks. Is there any mystery to this room? And I'll do it very quickly. Does anyone have more than 2 quarterbacks on their 53-man roster?
No, I think it's pretty much Fromm and Trubisky, and we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Such a strong dislike for you so much. So Sterling, any mystery as far as priority for practice squad? Any consideration to keeping a third? Obviously, they did last year because they wanted Fromm as that kind of COVID distance quarterback, just in case, because of the crazy stuff we saw, like in Denver, where you had the wide receiver actually playing quarterback. I think this is probably the easiest and most clear cut, maybe besides the specialist roles. Did you ever consider anything beyond that?
No, I didn't. I think Fromm gets cut, but I think they're going to bring him back on the practice squad.
Yeah, I know a lot of people immediately want to go to, Webb is much more valuable. They did.
Is he?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Is he?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I mean, that
Is he?
It didn't look good last week. I don't know that he's a better talent, and I don't know that Josh Allen needs a crutch of a guy anymore at this point. I think that they have enough people in the building to do that.
Yeah, Anthony, I know I made fun of it a lot when I was doing my game thread. Every time Davis Webb gets in the game, he's literally like in Necessary Roughness, where he's like backpedaling real fast. Blow the whistle! Blow the whistle! Like that dude does not want to get touched by another football player at all. And I love all the coach on the field things. I love all the other pieces of it. I don't want that guy in a football game at any point. So I'm fine if they prefer his contributions to the quarterback room and his ability to help prepare during the week. I still kind of think Jake Fromm's actually a better quarterback, even though I don't want either of them on the active roster.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want either of them seeing real snaps, but if we were in a die-hard emergency scenario, I would prefer Fromm to take the snaps over Webb. My only thought with this grouping, was who goes to the practice squad. Is it just Fromm? Is it just Webb? Do they try to get both on there?
With the 16, maybe there's a chance they do both. My guess is they only do one.
Do we get 17 technically because of Christian Wade?
Sure.
So Sal Capaccio went through a handful of things. They actually changed the International Pathways program. Remember, in the previous 2 years, we had to pick or choose. If you put him on there, he could not be called up at all. Now we get the exception, and he could be called up. So there's no downside. If he makes a practice squad, they get him for free with no exceptions and could bring him up if they wanted to. So I have to assume he's going to be that, and he would be the 17th person. He would not count against the 16 spots.
Copy that.
All right, so Shea Tierney, Ken Dorsey, everyone out of my office. We are now welcoming Kelly Skipper, Brian Dable, and we're going to bring in Heath Farwell because there could be a little special teams discussion here. Aaron, let's start with you. What running backs do you have making this roster?
Yeah, so this one is a tough one for me at the end because this is where Heath Farwell is going to come into play. But I got Singletary, Moss, and Breida, and then we'll throw Gilliam in here in this discussion as the fullback and keep him in the running backs room. And I think I'm good with those four on the 53. And I'm one of the biggest Taiwan Jones stands out there. I really am. Right now, we'll get into it later. He's kind of in this debate with me with like guys like Justin Zimmer, Tyrell Dotson, some of these guys that maybe have a little bit more impact at their position than he does at his position. And Greg, you and I have talked about this a lot of how many of these special teams studs can you keep on this team with how deep this team is and with the concerns of lack of depth at certain positions. So for me right now, Jones is out, but I'm open to arguments of whoever wants to play Heath Farwell.
So Sterling, we'll go to you next. First, let's start with who did you have on your 53-man roster?
So I got Singletary, Moss, Breida, and Taiwan Jones.
Okay, no Gilliam.
No, not yet.
Okay. Anthony, we'll go to you first, and then we'll come back.
Similar to Sterling, and with a foreshadowing of not yet for Reggie Gilliam for me as well. I think, and also too, if we're playing from the perspective on what we think will happen, it was very interesting to see Taiwan Jones sitting for the first game against Detroit, along with the likes of Josh Allen and all those dudes. And we've heard the verbiage thrown around where he's an elite special teams player. Not even just we've seen, because for Andre Smith and Daryl Johnson, who we know they love for special teams, the phrasing for those two have been core or like great. They said elite, and I think they're very poignant and purposeful with the verbiage that they choose for guys. I like what Taiwan Jones brings. I value special teams a lot, and within my roster breakdown, I was able to include Taiwan along, like Sterling mentioned, and as Aaron as well, with Breida, Moss, and Devin Singletary, and then I have something else planned for Reggie Gilliam. But so technically, I've got four there.
Sterling, any consideration for Antonio Williams? I know it was a great stretch against the Dolphins last year. Maybe a little rougher in the first game, but I thought he looked better in the second game against the Bears, or later in the game against Detroit. And then obviously we didn't get to see him against the Bears. So any consideration for Antonio Williams? I know he had a lot of support at one point.
Yeah, I mean, as cool as the story is, I mean, I just don't think at this point in time, we don't have the luxury of having cool stories on the roster in that terms at running back, right? But I do applaud him for what he's done, but no, he was not in consideration to make the squad on my 53.
So, Aaron, does it come down for you to the versatility of being able to contribute on scrimmage reps and then hoping, because Gilliam also can be a 4-phase special teams guy. Mm-hmm. Was that your tiebreaker between him and Jones?
Yeah, and I just think he's a tool that can be used in this offense 17 games in the regular season. And I agree that Taiwan Jones is an elite gunner. I look at the defensive side of the ball, and there's guys that can contribute as special teams players that can also contribute at their positions. And that's where I'm at right now. And I think likely Brandon Beane's going to keep Taiwan Jones. But in my opinion, if I'm constructing this roster, I don't need that many special teams contributors. This was a really good special teams unit a year ago, and I don't know that removing Taiwan Jones drops that unit off substantially when you have the number of other guys that they have that are core special teams contributors. So for me, that was more Gilliam's like a Swiss Army knife that can do special teams, and he adds something to his offense that Brian Dable really likes.
Yeah. So you saw, obviously, we saw him more as a true fullback in that game against the Bears than we did all last year. Obviously, I joked all the time. I didn't care what they were going to label him as on the roster. Last year, he had, I think it was 56 snaps in the backfield and 6 in line at tight end. So I don't care that they called him a tight end last year. He was still a fullback and a special teams player. He's the same thing this year, but they called him a fullback. And all of a sudden in the game, he gets 4 legit short yardage carries on 2 touchdown runs and 2 fourth down conversions. He then gets a killer lead block on the 1 touchdown, or would have been a touchdown. I think that was the one that was technically called out at the 6-inch line.
The Moss run.
Yeah, that he ended up scoring on the next play. So had some, hard to argue flashes in that game. I'm going to earmark this one as 4 running backs for right now. We're going to come back to it as we get into what I think is going to be a pretty strong debate for this 52nd, 53rd guy on the roster to figure out, can we fit a 5th running back versus a 7th receiver versus an 11th defensive lineman. I think some of that's going to come up here. So I'm going to earmark that one as 4 running backs for right now, and we'll come back and figure out, do we need to choose Jones versus Gilliam, or can we fit both? So Anthony, we'll lead off with you. You now get to put on the hat of Chad Hall. We are going to be looking at wide receivers. We got a little bit of Heath Farwell in this discussion, but mostly this one is going to be Brian Dable and Chad Hall. Traditionally, besides maybe a return job, receiver has been a purely offensive position, but maybe sprinkling in a little special teams coverage this year. Anthony, who are your wide receivers?
So this is where I have Gilliam. He's my number 1 receiver. Just kidding. This decision, especially with the whole injury thing playing, and I know we're not taking that into account, but that really stressed my brain a little bit with what's going on with McKenzie.
And so let me pause here for anybody listening. The exact same discussion is going to happen at One Bills Drive, because any of the guys that you want to be eligible for that quick 3-week return from injured reserve have to make the 53-man roster. So unless we find out that, God forbid, Isaiah McKenzie broke his collarbone and is out for the year, which I kind of think that news would have broken by now. I don't know that, but I kind of think if that was the case and that it was, he's done for the year, we would know that. The fact that we don't know it means it's an indeterminate severity, but I don't believe it's going to be that he's out for the year. So it doesn't change a great deal of this discussion, other than who's the second move if they do need to put him on the injured reserve for a while. But for making the 53, as far as I'm concerned, he's still as much of a lock as he was before. It's just that maybe now, is Stevenson ready? Is now our new addition Steven Sims the person? Is Brandon Powell that guy? Which we'll talk about in a second. But for anybody asking, we're going to treat some of these spots like Zimmer, like Harrison Phillips, like Isaiah McKenzie, both Taron Johnson and Levi Wallace. All of them are as much as a roster lock, or had the roughly same chances of making the roster, because if they're going to make the 53, they're then eligible for the chicanery that you can play with to put them on IR and then re-sign someone else. So as we go through this exercise, they're probably going to take up the same roster spots they would have, and then it's just what options do they have afterwards for a call-up of a guy who would have been practice squad who now gets added back to the active roster, some of those kind of things. So I apologize, just want to clarify that. I know that question is going to come up from a lot of fans, and as we talk through this, we'll consider it as though they need to take up the same 53-man roster spot, and then we can talk about some of the guys who might be brought back more quickly, like maybe a Reggie Gilliam later.
Awesome explanation. And that's really the whole injury piece is exactly, you mentioned chicanery. That's what it conflicted for me. How does that, if McKenzie is out for, say he's going to be out until again, God forbid, and knock on wood, say he's out till week 4, week 5 of the regular season, what gamesmanship or chicanery does that result in for other receivers, for other positional groupings who made just all the moves and everything? So that came into my head a bit. But honestly, the biggest thing for the wide receiver grouping here, I was very set on 6 for a long time. Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Manny Sands, Gabriel Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, and training camp hero Jake Kumaro. And then in the same game, Isaiah McKenzie fumbles a punt, something that he's had issues with before. And in that same game, Marcus Stevenson houses one on a bum ankle that he apparently hurt before that. So he houses a punt and outruns everybody on a bad wheel, which is very impressive. He has some really nice flashes the week before in Detroit. That's what made it tough for me. Keeping 7 receivers is a lot, but I went with 7 receivers: Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Manny Sands, Gabriel Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, Jake Kumaro, and Marcus Stevenson.
Same. Don't even have to talk to me.
Aaron endorses. Sterling, what were your thoughts from the wide receiver position and where you think that's going to fit in? Do we lose Sterling for a second?
I think he was so amazed with my take that he just
I think so.
he's just dumbfounded by how great
it was. So
7 it is.
Well, so this one, I feel probably the most confident that this is going to be a spot where it's 7 for a day is what I assume. Is that this is one of those spots where it's 7 receivers on Tuesday the 31st, and on September 1st, whoever gets moved to injured reserve, or honestly, maybe even 2, depending on where Stevenson is. It could be, Isaiah McKenzie and Marcus Stevenson have been moved to injured reserve, and we have signed back Steven Sims, or signed back Brandon Powell, or whatever it might be. So Sterling, we're just going through, both Aaron and Anthony have it at 7 wide receivers with Diggs, Beasley, Sanders, Davis, which of course I think those are 4 absolute locks. I'm assuming most have McKenzie as a lock. They both have Kumaro, and they both have Stevenson as a 7th receiver. What do you have?
I got the same thing.
Yes.
But I will say this though. I've been a Stevenson fan for quite some time, but Diggs, Beasley, Sanders, Davis, Kumaro, McKenzie, Stevenson. I mean, I think that's a really, really solid group from top to bottom. And I really do like what McKenzie's been able to do this offseason, limited preseason action. I mean, it's been really encouraging. I know, Greg, you and I talked about the idea of maybe Isaiah McKenzie kind of graduating to a real wide receiver role. I think it's just kudos to him that, if they actually do keep Stevenson, I think it's an ode to the work that McKenzie's put in this offseason.
Yeah. A couple quick questions from the chat. Egriff here asking if the 2020 IR rules are in place. Yes, it's the same. So when you heard me reference 16 practice squad spots, that was kept, and the 3-week injured reserve was also kept. It sounds like there's momentum to be able to carry those over into the future indefinitely. It is not official yet. So those 2 are in place, but it's not official in having that there. It is official for 2021. So it was extended for 1 year. So that also adds a couple other things that aren't as popular or as big of a deal. In the 16-man practice squad, it also lifted the veteran limits. So before you could only have certain non-vested veterans on your practice squad. Now you could have anybody on the practice squad. You also can do the call-ups where you can add 2 guys as a 54th and 55th guy as an active spot, which, that's the kind of spot where if you only need a week or 2 of a returner, all of a sudden Steven Sims on the practice squad can be called up and can be the returner for 2 weeks and not take up an active roster spot. You also have the opportunity for the 4 protected practice squad spots that you can play with. So all those rules that were used last year are the ability here. And the name that I was going to ask, Nick is asking, I was a big fan of Isaiah Hodgins. I can't argue with what we've seen both in the games from an availability standpoint, and I know Joe Marino was one of the guys who really talked about it, that he loved what he was hearing and seeing with Isaiah Hodgins, but one of his notes from watching him in college was, would it translate when NFL corners could get physical with him? And that's kind of where we've seen things drop a little bit as we've seen him get into practice. Did anyone even consider Hodgins, or is that just kind of an official, either a stash, hey, we got to roll the dice and try to get him through waivers on the practice squad, or if we lose him, we have so much depth that we can just afford it now? I'll start with you, Sterling. Did you consider Isaiah Hodgins?
I didn't consider Isaiah Hodgins, but considering that the Bills just let go of Duke Williams, I think Isaiah Hodgins becomes the new Duke Williams. He's a project guy, somebody that they're going to trot around and see what they can ounce out of him.
Anthony, how about you?
I considered him to make the practice squad. He was someone, I'm hoping would get to the practice squad. I thought he was going to be not a lock, but I thought he would be the 6th receiver. I was extremely excited for him to come into training camp and to come into the preseason. And, Greg, you and I talked about it at the first open practice. He really didn't flash. He didn't separate. He didn't do a lot.
I absolutely had him in that Kumaro spot. before Kumaro, genuinely took it. Like, he took that job from him. I had him firmly in that 6th spot. I was talking about how maybe he was ahead of McKenzie, that maybe he's got a head start on Stevenson because he was, a similar level draft pick, but a year earlier. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen him do it in a game or in practice to where it needs to matter.
For sure. And I think what's so upsetting, I like his game, and it just sucks that he finally gets a catch on the board against Detroit, gets hurt on that play. And then you got to think the script, regardless of whether Hodgins was healthy or not, the script for the Chicago game was going to be what the script for the Chicago game was. And in a game where Trubisky throws it a ton and Jake Fromm throws it a bunch, a game where the wide receivers can do some things and showcase their ability and get some more opportunities instead of the run-heavy game 1 against Detroit where Hodgins did play. It sucks that he could have had some more opportunities potentially in that Chicago game. But at this point, I think, it's unfortunate he got hurt. He hasn't shown enough. I will say, though, I think you do have a good opportunity to get Hodgins back down to the practice squad again. I don't know. That was a big separator for me, in addition to Stevenson's play overall and the lack thereof, I guess, from Hodgins. I don't know if – it's tough for dudes to get picked up on waivers anyway, but I don't know with what Stevenson showed. I don't know if he makes it immediately through waivers or if he gets snagged. I think the odds of Hodgins making it through and coming back to us and staying with the team are higher, and I still hope he can develop into something because I like parts of his game. It's just been unfortunate for him so far.
Well, if you go through, that kind of game theory is going to be exactly what they're debating. So you look at Jake Kumaro. If you release him and put him through waivers, I'll bet anything that the Packers claim him. There's no way he makes it through.
Yeah,
agreed.
If you
Aaron Rodgers will do the paperwork.
Yeah, yes, he will. He won't even ask the GM or Mark Murphy. He'll file the paperwork himself. Marcus Stevenson has flashed too much. He is just you can't have the flashes that he's shown in a recent draft pick. You just can't do those things. I'm curious where that falls on the previous discussion with Gilliam or Taiwan Jones is a vested veteran. He wouldn't have to do that, but he actually has a decent amount of guaranteed money. So I made the point on Twitter yesterday that Taiwan Jones is one of those guys that you kind of either you're keeping him or you're not. He's not a go wait in the parking lot guy because it actually would cost us $700,000 to release him and bring him back because of the signing bonus, roster bonus, and guaranteed money. So he's one of those guys that either we're releasing because he's not making the roster, or if he's making it, you just keep him and you keep him on the roster and he's there. He's not one of those guys you play with as far as, we're going to cut him for a second and then bring him back. And then guys, some of the older guys that you don't think about, Jake Kumaro and Justin Zimmer do not have 4 vested years in the NFLPA. They are exposed to waivers as well. So some of those guys that people, play around with that, we'll just have him wait like Andre Roberts. We actually have a little bit fewer of those guys than what we thought. The weird part is one of them is Isaiah McKenzie that you actually could do. Matt Breida is another guy who probably makes the most sense. He has the least, out of the guys who are likely to make the team but don't have a lot of dead cap. Matt Breida is one of the ones that I think would be the most likely to be like, hey, we'll give you an extra $30,000 if you go wait over there. So
just
we'll see we'll see where those ones go. Right now, I do agree that I think with the situation we have and needing the extra, we need to be able to budget to figure out how to keep a 7th receiver at least on Tuesday, the day that you cut to 53. I think that's a very likely one where we go into week 1 with 6 on the roster, but that we need to get to 7 first to then put, depending on severity, McKenzie or Stevenson into IR, and then either only have 5 and do a call-up with Sims or with Brandon Powell. But Brandon Powell is technically another vested veteran that you could release and bring back. So that's an interesting spot. All right, now we're going to move to tight ends. Tight ends, you get into a mix of offense. You get into a mix of maybe a little input from the offensive line and Bobby Johnson. You get into a little mix of Heath Farwell. Sterling, we'll start with you. Who do you have? How many tight ends and which tight ends do you have making the roster?
So I have 3 tight ends. They had 3 tight ends last year, so we're going to stick with that. And I have Knox, Hollister, and Reggie Gilliam as a tight end.
Ooh, sneaky.
Yeah, I just think his versatility says that, he's one of those – it's a flex position. And I think, if you look back at film last year in those games, they used tight ends as fullbacks and different situations and stuff. So I just think that it's a seamless transition for him. He's played the position, and he showed out this preseason.
Very sneaky. I respect it. Anthony, I'm going to take it from the high five that you had some similar gamesmanship going on.
Yes, very much so. Literally the same thing. I like Tommy Sweeney. I think he's like flashed a little bit more in the receiving game than we give him credit for.
Maybe a touch more.
Yeah.
Yep. And I like what he does as a blocker. And I know that the staff likes him, Bean likes him, McDermott likes him. This is where I had to, Sterling is on point. Shout out to Ben for recognizing Sterling's on
The beard game's strong too.
Yeah, it is a really nice beard.
Real strong.
Middle class white man, you know, I got to get in there. You know?
I don't know how to keep going now.
The rest of us are patchy.
Your beard game is great. It's like mine's patchy and sucks.
I'm
it looks
patchy.
decent when it's shaved, which is like shaved down, but as it grows out, it just gets worse.
You should hear what the Rock Power Report, Drew at the Rock Power Report has to say about my facial hair.
He's
It's
not polite.
It's not
He's
good.
not polite.
Not great.
I'm gonna send y'all some Soul Glow. I'm gonna send it to you.
Do it. Help me.
It's gonna have your
me.
beard just banging.
Does it work on top?
Exactly.
Help me.
All right, rein this back in. Back to tight ends, Anthony. Back to
focus.
tight ends.
Tommy Sweeney's beard. I don't think it's good enough to keep him on. No. I went back and forth with it, but for all the points that, Greg, you spoke about, Reggie Gilliam earlier after Aaron kept him with his running backs. That's the reason he makes it here for me. Especially with how much we use the tight end. I think we could really get by, knock on wood, with just having technically two true tight ends in Dawson Knox and Jacob Hollister. And I'll do whatever I can at this point to find snaps or a roster spot for Reggie Gilliam. The special teams aspect, the fullback aspect, some inline tight end things. He also can run some routes in the flats and do some things. And we also didn't mention that he got legitimate halfback carries to close out the game, not just fullback dives, like legitimate
and looked
halfback
okay.
Yes, it wasn't bad.
Some nice cuts.
Like he did have some nice cuts and some fluidity. I was very impressed. So I like Tommy Sweeney, and my thought is he will get there to the practice squad. And because of that, and again, that's another one. Like, if we're just talking in terms of that reality, if we cut someone who's more likely to make it to the practice squad, Tommy Sweeney or Reggie Gilliam, my thought is Tommy Sweeney. I'm going to be a little sneakiness, Greg, like you mentioned, and like Sterling led off with. And Dawson Knox, Jacob Hollister, and Reggie Gilliam are my three tight ends.
Aaron, I think it's a compelling case. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I'm open to it. I have Knox, Hollister, and Sweeney.
Okay.
I think if you stand them all up in a room, they would almost, like if you were just backs to them, they sort of look the same part there. We were at camp a couple years ago and we saw the tight end room. We were like, what? This all looks the same. This is the
when
Bills
you added
prototype.
Lee Smith and Tyler Croft into that same group, it's literally the same humans.
Looked the same. I think that's a mold they like, but I'm open. I do think you could get Tommy Sweeney back on the practice squad. And if you needed that tight end and in the case of somebody getting hurt or dinged up, you could pull him up and kind of interchange those parts. So I'm not going to pound the table for a Tommy Sweeney, but in my roster, I had Sweeney there.
Yeah, and so it's funny. The same thing. GCOs. We're going through the same thing. I have like a spreadsheet I'm going through, so I can actually keep the numbers while we're talking here. I do think there's some sound logic that Sweeney is much less likely to be claimed than a Marcus Stevenson, than a Jake Kumaro, than a Reggie Gilliam. I do think there's also a capped upside to Tommy Sweeney. That's one of those spots where I like him. I'm fine if he's a long-term third tight end, second tight end. If he maybe starts to contribute on special teams a little bit, his blocking is good. I don't know that it's some, enormous mistake if he gets claimed by someone else. We're never going to have like, oh man, I can't believe we lost Tommy Sweeney. Like, he just doesn't have that upside. He's a very limited athlete, but he's an NFL caliber athlete and deserves to be on a roster. And it's not crazy for him to be in that discussion with other teams. I do think because of the depth at positions, some that we haven't gotten to yet, and ones like our debate at wide receiver, he is some of the gamesmanship you might play with. So I actually like that right now. Whether we mark that as 2 or 3 tight ends, I actually like that Gilliam almost acts like a 4.5 running backs, 2.5 tight ends. You get that flexibility of how you use him. And then what it really turns into is, if you ask someone who's going to have more contributions to this roster, Tywan Jones as a gunner or Tommy Sweeney as the third tight end, I think it's more likely that we get contributing snaps from Tywan Jones. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it. If you simply pivot it in your mind as Gilliam to the third tight end spot, that's an interesting way to go about it. Aaron, we're now going to pivot over. We've got OG Bobby Johnson ready to roll with the offensive line. What do you have for this offensive line group? It's a little bit bigger. You could do tackles and interior if you want, or you can rattle through them all.
Yeah, I did them by position. So let's see. I have 6, 8, 7, 8 guys. I got Dawkins, Williams, Brown, Feliciano, Ford, Botker, Morrison, Bates is who I'm keeping. So I got one backup at each position. Brown's my swing tackle, Botker's my replacement guard, and then Bates is the backup center. And I think everyone else you can bring back on the practice squad. I don't think your Tommy Doyle is gonna gain a lot of interest after his preseason here. I'm not worried about that, and there's really nobody else on the line that I'm worried about exposing.
So it's interesting. Whereas McKenzie, you're forced to, hey, we got to put him on the 53 to then get him to the IR. I debated the exact opposite with Tommy Doyle in that, well, if he's dinged up, is anybody going to claim him after getting housed in some of these preseason games? And do we even need to put him there? And, I even kind of debated, is this kind of a secret blessing to just put him on IR for the season ahead of time and just let him sit and develop for the whole year? I'm curious to see. I would not be shocked if between now and Monday we see a move that Tommy Doyle is put onto season-ending IR alongside Forrest Lamp. He's still got the same rookie contract from an agent standpoint. There's very little downside. He still gets the same accrued NFLPA season. It would be, it may be a blessing in disguise. Sterling, what do you have for the numbers at offensive line?
So I have 9 rostered. The Bills had 10 last year. So I have everyone. I added Tommy Doyle to mine. So it's Dawkins, Feliciano, Morse, Ford, Williams, Brown, Botker, Bates, and Tommy Doyle. I think that if anything we've learned, like I said earlier in the show, that they do love, that position flexibility. They like to be heavy on offensive and defensive line. And if anything, we talk about offensive linemen that we let go that we shouldn't have let go. There's one that we traded to the Cleveland Browns that's now an all-pro. I'm not saying Tommy Doyle is that by any means, but I just think there's a developmental process that they like to tend to, kind of likened to how they've done with Cody Ford. So I don't think they're going to let Tommy Doyle go, even though he's just not ready yet.
Anthony, where did you draw the line for your offensive lineman? The new rules, one of the other carryovers that we added that I didn't bring in is the rule where if you do the 48th game day active player, it has to be an 8th offensive lineman. So they're not going to go below 8. And if they do 8, all of them would be game day active. There would be no game day inactive. If Doyle makes it, he's the most obvious game day inactive. Or as Dawn asked in the chat here, Jack Anderson would be one that would be in that discussion. So I think it's very unlikely all the draft picks make it. Anthony, how many offensive linemen did you have?
It was tough. But Sterling and Aaron already covered it. I went back and forth between the 8 and the 9, with Doyle being the person who would influence potentially 9. I just don't see, Spin has a good comment here in the chat, and I don't want to say that it would be a wasted spot, but I don't really know how much Tommy Doyle is contributing this year. And Greg, to your point, I think he's a high candidate for some sort of gamesmanship that lands him not an official protected spot, but they do something with him, almost a la Isaiah Hodgins last year when he got placed on the IR, and it was like, oh, guess he's got to stay on, here all year. Oh no.
Shucks.
So yeah, all shucks. We got to keep this guy. Oh, and then, we know the rules, have to interrupt. Thank you very much, Griff, for the super sticker. Appreciate you. Regular fan of everything for Cover One. You are a tremendous. Thank you so much. I also like the little teal color that the $5 super sticker got. So that's a fun thing.
Bring it back.
Yeah. Bring it back. I get distracted easily like a cat with a laser pointer. I'm going with 8. And I think Tommy Doyle with how much he got worked so far this preseason, even if he was just a straight cut or wave, I think he's got a decent shot decent shot to just come back on the practice squad. He's somebody who needs more seasoning. He needs more development, as does Spencer Brown, but he needs much more. And not to be Rob Quinn got raked over the coals, but I didn't think he was tremendously wrong when he put that tweet out about how everybody was ragging on Bobby Hart. But Tommy Doyle also got beat pretty bad on a significant amount of snaps as well. So I've got 8. Deion Dawkins, John Feliciano, Mitch Morse, Cody Ford, Darrell Williams, Spencer Brown, Ryan Bates, and Ike Bodker, with Doyle potentially getting in there, but really just either getting IR'd or sent down in practice squad.
I think Sterling brings up a good point. I'd like to have 10. Like in my perfect roster world, I'd like to have 10 good enough.
I'd like to have at
offensive
least
linemen.
9. I'd like to have at least 9, ideally.
I would too. I agree. The more the merrier on both sides of the lines. I think what they're going to do is they'll be heavy on the practice squad and the offensive line. I think you're going to see maybe a higher number there than we typically see, where if things get a little hairy for a game, they got to pull a guy in, then they'll do that.
Well, and we'll bring it up later on. There's one other position, but this is by far the position that I think we have, honestly, the weakest depth at the bottom end, because I'm not making a case for Jameel Douglas, for Jordan Debbie, for Jack Anderson, or for he who shall not be named. I'm not making a case.
I'll make a case
any
for
of
Bobby
those
Hart
guys.
just for my mentions to burn.
Just to do it.
That I don't care if any of them are on the practice squad or on the roster, because I don't want any of them in a game at any point ever. And if I don't ever want you in a game, I don't care where we have you or where it is. This is the spot I think they're going to be the most active at looking at other teams' waivers, or we don't see player for player trades very often, so I'm not anticipating that. But in theory, this is a spot where it's hard. If neither Stevenson or McKenzie had gotten hurt, this is a spot where I'm looking at the Packers, roster and being like, hey, how many tackles you got? Because we'll give you Jake Kumaro for one of those tackles if you got one. We'll, hey,
David Bakhtiari.
Make your guy. Yeah. I mean, you guys aren't using that Bakhtiari guy. But no, I mean, that's the kind of thing where I do think they're going to be looking at doing a roster claim. I don't think there's a lot of spots on this roster where we are going to be looking to add guys who were cut by other NFL teams. We are going to be the opposite end of that. They're going to be scouring our depth chart to look to be able to add some of those guys. This is one of those spots where I'm not going to be heartbroken if we lose any of those guys. And I do think even if it's 9 for a moment, I think it's 9 for a moment. Like it's 7 for wide receiver for a day, and then Doyle gets put on IR and he sits there to be able to hold it. And then we play with the practice squad where it's probably those 8 guys, and there's also the game day actives. And then if you need to do the call up, you can do the protected spots. You can do the 2 practice squad call up guys. You can play with that with the 54th and 55th guys as you need. And that's where, all right, if Jordan Debbie is the guy that gets called
they're
up
all the same
to whatever, I don't care who it is. I wouldn't be heartbroken if they found a guy somewhere that we could develop as an extra guy. And then out of there, I will leave it open that, hey, we know the least about Jack Anderson. So if he ends up being some level of developmental prospect on the practice squad, I'm not, I don't think it matters if he gets claimed, but maybe we come across something there and we're able to go about it. But I do think Sterling has a point that maybe Tommy Doyle was a 5th-round pick. He had an elite RAS score. He's the kind of guy that maybe we try to be able to protect a little bit. So maybe they keep 9 for a day, and then all of a sudden that's where Matt Breida gets released and brought back. Maybe that's where, Jacob Hollister gets released and brought back. Those are the kind of guys that we could be able to figure that out.
Real quick on the offensive line, I think this is a good point. I don't know if Don is saying that the Bills are one of the things around the league, but I think league-wide, we talked about this the other night, Greg, that a lot of teams struggle to put together a solid starting offensive line at 5 positions, let alone when you're getting into that 5th, 6th, or the 6th, 7th, 8th guys in terms of depth. So
you watch the second half of any of these preseason games and pray for the quarterback in every single one of them.
Absolutely. My brother's a big Bears fan, and I was yelling at him, like, what was Nagy doing putting Fields behind that line? Like, that these aren't fair. And that's the way it is, I think, across most of the NFL when you're talking about the guys here we're talking about in terms of depth. So I know fans probably want more depth behind the starters, but that's just not, we don't play in a Madden world.
And I also think, too, to the point people were speaking in the chat, I sympathize with a lot of people. I wanted to see what we had in Forrest Lamp. I would have really liked to see him get some snaps. Like,
he would have been my 9th guy. I would have loved that.
Sure.
That would have been the reason that, oh, hey, maybe Bates kicks back outside instead of focusing on interior and center. But, it is what it is. It's, similar to some of the challenges he had with the Chargers. You got to be able to stay on the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
All right.
Something availability.
The greatest
something
ability
like that,
is
yeah.
availability.
Something like that.
Anthony, maybe the most fun position on this entire roster, and now the opposite problem of what we
All the
have
things. Keep
at
all the
offensive
things.
line is how in the world do you pare down this ridiculous embarrassment of riches at defensive line?
So for majority of the offseason, I mean, in defensive end and defensive tackle are tied somewhat together because of what we're keeping on that defensive line and the positional flexibility of several of the edge players.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in case anyone didn't know what, they're connected. I had 6 for a heavy majority of this offseason. I had
For
Daryl
defensive
Johnson.
end.
Yes, for defensive end. I had Daryl Johnson as the odd man out. And then you just heard a lot of positive things, as expected, reiterated about him regards to his special team ability and functionality. And that's funny from Kyle. Yeah, if there's no Bam, I'm considering it a personal attack. Now I kind of just want to put it at 6 and have him not be the 7th. But we know how good Daryl Johnson's been on special teams. We know his versatility, his, the talk of, how someone for his size and athleticism, how fast he is and how he gets downfield on kickoff coverage. He's able to play all 4 phases, all these types of things. And I think he's continued to show progress as an actual defensive end. Correct.
For 2 years, he was not a playable defensive end.
No, he was a nice guy that you hoped he could.
He was a good special teamer and a net negative when he was on the field, the defensive end. This preseason, he's legitimately looked good. He's looked good at defensive end.
Yes. I've been blessed to do the Cover One film room with Eric Turner and be able to see some really good footage of, some things. And he's been a guy who's flashed several times at actual defensive end positioning, like with his long arm, with his inside rush ability, some of his stunts, and just his overall awareness. And because of that, and along with the special teams aspect plays a very heavy role in this. I don't think we can kid ourselves with that, but I'm keeping 7. Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, AJ Epinesa, Gregory Rousseau, Carlos Basham, F.A. Obata, and Daryl Johnson. And if I had to cut one, I would still cut Daryl Johnson because there's no way. I think it comes for most people, it comes down to Obata versus Bam Johnson, and no disrespect to Bam, I don't even consider that a comparison because I think F.A. Obata has arguably been our best defensive lineman. Groot and Epinesa have been getting a ton of shine. F.A. Obata has won about 85% of his snaps all preseason. So, yeah, I'm going with 7, and I feel like Aaron kind of likes
Talk
that.
to me about it. I love F.A. Obata. I said when we went through the defensive ends, I said on this show that he is going to play and make Brandon Beane keep him on this team, that they're going to have a hard time keeping him off this team. And he proved me more right than I thought, to be honest. I think his play has been actually a surprise to me, and I was a guy pounding the table for him. And so I agree with you 100%. I'm down with 7, and I got to give a shout out to a Cover One Slack member, Mark Ryan, who has been a Bam Johnson stan since the jump. Since the jump, and I've been making fun of him in the Slack channel for the last 2.5 years, saying like, this is crazy, this guy doesn't deserve to be on this roster. He absolutely deserves a spot on this roster. And I think Anthony, you brought up a great point, which we'll get to when we talk about the tackles. The position flexibility of some of these guys makes it so I'm totally comfortable with keeping 7 because they're going to be able to kick some of these guys in. And we saw, this is every single year Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott prioritize something. And they made a huge priority into this position group. We came in after the draft and they took 2 ends, and now I'm happy that they took 2. I love the depth at this position. I'm a big believer in the games won in the trenches. And the Bills it's preseason, so I'm pumping my own brakes a little bit. But the reason that they've looked dominant throughout games is winning in the trenches, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I want to maintain that as much as possible. I want to keep as many of those pieces as possible. And if Bam Johnson is a dude that can actually be a net positive at defensive end and a special teams player, it's a no-brainer for me to keep him. So I'm with it at 7 here in the same exact guys as you, and I'm Team Obata all the way. I want to see a lot of F.A. Obata in this defense this year.
I think it's really interesting. And Sterling, as we go through, Anthony talked through about why he believed it was 7 defensive ends and having Hughes, Addison, Epinesa, Obata, Rousseau, Basham, and Daryl Johnson. 7 is a crazy number. Heck, 6 is a really rare number. Most teams don't keep 6. So getting to 7 is crazy. But then you look at, Addison can kick inside, Ovada can kick inside, Basham can kick inside. Honestly, I kind of have to imagine Daryl Johnson can kick inside as well, just as at his size. So Sterling, who did you have from a defensive end group as we go through who you have on the actual roster?
So I kind of did it as the group as a whole. Defensive line, defensive tackle, defensive end. So defensive end, I got Hughes, Addison, Epinesa, Rousseau, Obata, and Johnson as my ends. Whereas have we gone defensive tackle yet? Or are we doing it?
That'll be next. Go ahead.
Okay. And then defensive tackle wise, obviously, you got Oliver, you got Latulele, and I got Justin Zimmer here. I really do think that there's something to be said about what the coaching staff has echoed this offseason about Justin Zimmer's play, and we all know, what does Vernon Butler really offer? I think we really have to examine his viability here. I just don't think he really offers much. Now, from a cap standpoint, Greg, you could probably school us on that, what that looks like, but I don't think he makes the roster.
What about Basham? Did you have Basham?
Yeah, I got Basham.
Okay, I didn't hear Basham.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and so a couple of people in the chat have asked, if it's this crazy deep and you have 11, who sits on game day? Early on, the fact that we can afford to have the luxury of honestly probably having Boogie Basham as a second-round pick be game day inactive is great. Like, it's not the same as Tommy Doyle, who's a fifth-round pick, but it's okay if he's not ready to contribute day one. It's okay if we need to give Harrison Phillips a little bit of time. You have some opportunities with guys like that. I've seen a couple configurations with 3 D tackles and 7 defensive ends because of the versatility of so many defensive ends going in. I also have seen enough flashes from Zimmer and Phillips that I think it's debatable to go 11 defensive linemen, and especially that's another one, like I said, 7 for a day. With the injury we saw with Phillips, it's very likely he's just on the active roster for a day and then gets put on IR until he's ready to come back. But he would have to make the active roster first to then be able to get to that point. And then with the question on Vernon Butler, there is some savings. If we release him, you can save $1.7 million to be able to
$1.7
to do that. It's not nothing. Like, it's not the reason you're going to do that, but he's been outplayed by Justin Zimmer and Harrison Phillips, and you can tell that because they had him playing deep into the fourth quarter of the game against the Bears. That's how that works. If you're getting reps late and you're playing alongside Brandon Bryant, you got to ask yourself some questions why Trayvon Hester would be playing ahead of you and things like that. So, Aaron, with the defensive tackles, did you end up trimming it down to make room for that 7th defensive end, or did you make room for an 11th defensive lineman?
Well, one point that you kind of brought up about Basham maybe being the game day inactive. One thing too, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have proven was, I think a lot of people are going to be frustrated with Mario Addison this year being on the roster. Just, I don't know that he'll ever put up the numbers that are going to make anybody on Twitter happy. I like Mario Addison. I think he's got a nice role on this team, but I think he's going to be a guy that, similar to Trent Murphy, that I'm defending all year, and people are like, this guy sucks. He doesn't put up anything on the stat sheet. If that's true, and he's not putting up, they've proven to be able to take a vet like a Trent Murphy and make him the game day inactive, and if Basham's developing. So I think that gives them that flexibility. So I just want to get that point out there. But to the defensive tackles, for me, obviously Oliver, Starr, Phillips are my guys. I'm on the fence on Zimmer. I do think that this is a guy that they might be able to get in on the practice squad. I think that Bills fans maybe overhype him a little bit to who he is. I think coaches like him. He's got that motor. He's undersized league wide. I don't know that he fits a lot of other defenses. I think the Bills don't mind undersized guys with motors. I don't know how many coaches are out there that are going to take an undersized guy like this. So I think there's a chance that they can slip him in if they have to do some numbers games. But this is also a guy that I'm totally content and happy to put on the roster too. But I think if it comes down to, do you keep one guy? Do you keep a Tywan Jones or do you keep a Justin Zimmer? Again, I think Jones probably has more meaningful snaps in him than Zimmer does in this rotation, especially when you're adding this new idea of putting some edge players in, kicking him inside on some time. So I don't know how much run Zimmer would get. I like him, but I do think he's a guy you might be able to sneak. So I'm on the fence with Zimmer right now.
Anthony, make the case. Do you have 3 or 4?
I've got 4. The only debate, and not even really debate, but I agree with Aaron, the idea of being able to sneak Zimmer onto the practice squad. but I am very content and happy with him making the 53, especially after what he did in the game in Chicago. Oh, Jeffrey Danger. That's a fun name. Thank you, Jeffrey.
That was a good name.
It is a great name. Way better than mine. What he did in that Chicago game, his ability to just withstand double teams on the interior. He was chasing down screen plays. He was crossing the face of the center and then shedding and tackling running backs one-on-one and blowing up plays. I recognize he's undersized, but he is a bulldog inside and plays like he's 6'5", 400 pounds. And I like the depth inside. I know having 7 defensive ends and 4 defensive tackles, 11 there up front, but with the emphasis on the front 4 and the rotation aspect for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott this year, which they have implicitly implied through the drafting and the double dipping, and then also explicitly stated with how that's how they want to build the defense. I think it just increases the odds. We know that, they're going to show some blitzes and every now and again, and they're going to show that double A gap pressure. But in an ideal world, this defense is run like the Carolina Panthers defense that went to the Super Bowl with Cam Newton, where they're just rushing 4, they're dropping 7, they're disguising coverage on the back end, and they're doing a whole bunch of
nice
games.
plug.
Thanks, appreciate it. I didn't know if anybody would catch it. But yeah, they just want to rush 4 up there, maybe do some stunts, but they just want studs up front. They want to keep them fresh and rotate. So yeah, I went with 4. I'm a little worried on the actual thought process of Vernon Butler, and if there is some sunk cost fallacy aspect to it of, or we're keeping him because we've sank this money in, or also just the potential aspect of him taking that pay cut and that restructure this offseason. I don't know if it came with some sort of handshake deal, like, well, you're making the squad, so don't worry about it. Do us this solid. We're going to take care of you. That weighed heavily on my mind.
Just a couple examples of that. I think it's a great question. And people are kidding themselves if they don't think those kind of discussions take place where the offer is made, hey, you're not going to make the roster at your current cap number.
Yes.
But if you take this, is the comment that, hey, if you take this, you're going to make it? Or is the comment that, hey, if you take this, you've got a better chance of sticking on the roster? And we're never going to know exactly how those discussions take place in those kind of rooms. But, there's definitely some heavy implications of
I'm going to believe
likelihood.
McDermott's earned the right, though. I think
for sure.
It's
For
a way
sure.
like, hey, maybe you have a better chance, but I don't.
Patrick DeMarco. Patrick
Right.
DeMarco took a pay cut and then got released and did not make the roster.
Right.
So there are examples where it is not a foregone conclusion.
And Butler, in my opinion, is not earned.
Correct.
Anyway.
Correct.
And
No.
now to G Seal's question, the difference is similar to my comments with Tywan Jones. Vernon Butler is not a guy that you're going to release and then bring back because the $1.7 million is him being gone. You already eaten all the rest of the money. If you eat the rest of the money and then sign him back, you have to give him another $1 million because his minimum contract is around $1 million. He's got the bat phone off to the side. It's underneath the Christmas tree.
I don't know who that was.
If you release Vernon Butler and you eat the dead cap and then sign him back, the fact that he's into his 7th year, his minimum salary is $1 million. You'd have to pay him another $1 million. You'd eat up one of the $1.7 million. So he's a guy that either is making the roster, or if he's released and not coming back. You're not playing back and forth with him because then you're just wasting the money. You might as well mess around. That's not the guy. The guy you would do that with is Justin Zimmer and hope that he doesn't get picked up. He's the guy that you would play with in order to do that. Although they have the least options at defensive line, there are no obvious vested veterans you can sneak to be able to go. That's a great comment by Jason. You can sneak being able to cut and bring back. Everybody there is either pretty highly paid and you're not going to release them, or is on their rookie contract or not a vested veteran and they're exposed to waivers and would get claimed. So, I've seen some crazy comments. I know Carlos Basham has not looked great in the preseason. No team ever is going to release their 2nd-round pick. That's crazy.
And he had a pretty good game last week.
He was fine. He finally got home on one of those spin moves that he kept hitting the circle button. He finally got home on that.
Greg,
that was my way I got my wife. You just do the same thing over and over again. Persistence.
Greg, what do you think of this potential idea regarding defensive tackle?
If I can figure, I'll drive down to Cincinnati right now. I will drive down there right now and pick up my man Tyler Shelvin. And
You better have a big truck.
I'm gonna need to get a U-Haul. All right, so let's move on. I'm gonna hold that right now at 4 defensive tackles. I'm gonna read into it that it is Vernon Butler playing into the fourth quarter against the Bears is a pretty bad omen. I'm going to count it as 4 with Phillips going on the short-term IR, and that because of the flexibility and versatility of the defensive end group, they can Band-Aid that for a couple weeks. And that they don't want to go with 3 defensive tackles long-term, but that they can probably Band-Aid it with Oliver, Starr, and Zimmer for a short period of time. And maybe we see a Brandon Bryant type, or we see, somebody that it would have been Trayvon Hester. I'm not sure about the injury situation with him. That kind of guy would be a practice squad, and then maybe one of those 54th man call-ups that you just use as a Band-Aid for a week if you need to. I think that's the way they could juggle that in one of those spots. Let's move to linebacker. Aaron, we will start with you, your man, Bob Babbitt. You get to be Bob Babbitt for a day. Yep. This is one where it's a strong debate on how many do we need on the field, how many do we need at special teams, and with the depth at other spots, I see a lot of people thinking we can go with 5. It's always been 6. 6 is more common. What did you go with?
Yeah, it's a hard debate for me between 5 and 6, but I will say this is a group actually that the depth has surprised me here this summer, and actually guys like Tyler Manikevich playing pretty well as an actual linebacker makes me feel a lot better.
Similar to the Daryl Johnson comments. He was always only a special teamer, and now all of a sudden you're like, maybe he's okay.
Maybe we can have him in there in case of a total emergency like we saw last year. These in case of emergencies aren't totally crazy. Right from the jump last year, we saw Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano go down. I don't know if everybody forgot that because of the trauma that it caused us, but this group got real thin real fast, and we had to sign guys like Darren Lee, and people were hoping that he was going to save the season, which was not a good case. So I think we're in a much better position here this year in terms of depth. So I've got obviously Tremaine Edmonds, who's going to take a massive jump this year. I can't wait to see him. Matt Milano, AJ Klein, Tyler Manikevich. Andre Smith's having a great season or great preseason here, so I think he's a for sure.
Don't
lock.
ask any Bear fans. How'd your brother feel about him?
It was like an hour-long phone conversation the next day between me and him. I'm trying to talk him off a bridge on that one, but
press charges.
Yeah, I'm on the fence. Same with Zimmer, where I'm not really sold either way with Tyrell Dotson. I like Dotson a lot. I think he's flashed in his few opportunities that I've seen him. Not a ton this summer. Really, he hasn't done anything to really solidify his job this summer, but I'd be happy to keep him. But I don't know numbers wise if this is a guy that's going to be able to stick to this roster or not. Like you said, they traditionally keep the 6, so my gut is saying that they're going to keep him. I know Babbage likes him; he likes being here. So that's a guy that's on the fence for me. But I'm definitely sold. I think the 5 are definitely locks.
I like it. Sterling, who do you have as your linebackers?
I got the same 5, Milano, Edmonds, Smith, AJ Klein, and Tyler Matakevich. But I will say the play of Smith has been awesome to see. Just the fact that, his play speed has been incredible, and his instincts, those are things that make Tyrell Dotson expendable, right? That you have a guy, that can come in and spell, Matt Milano for a few series if he had to. So it's one of those, like you guys mentioned, I'm very surprised by the depth of this linebacker room. Last year, it was a sore spot when we talk about depth, but this year, man, it's looking pretty good. So those are my 5.
Also, a sneaky one, just a quick comment. I think a lot of people think of Andre Smith as a floating around journeyman because of the way that he got acquired and then released and brought back. He left college early, was then drafted by the Panthers, kept around for the year, and then sent over via trade. He's only 24. He's just turned 24 this spring. He's still very much a developing piece that coming out of North Carolina, maybe there was a little bit more there. So I think there's kind of a sneaky development curve for him as well that, what we've seen as a step forward so far has been pretty impressive in my opinion. So Anthony, I'm assuming you cut him.
Yeah, I think, and also special teams are useless, so I was like,
I brought this up before
this year, so
yeah, no, we're never going to punt, so it doesn't matter if you have coverage. The one thing, Andre Smith, when he played 11 games for the Bills last year. In those 11 games, he was right there with Tyler Matakevich in special team snaps. It looks like for the season, he's 5th or 6th in special team snaps. He was per game, he was actually right there with Matakevich as 1 and 2, ahead of Tywan Jones, ahead of Darryl Johnson, ahead of other guys. So I think between his scrimmage play at linebacker and that factor on special teams, he's really solidified himself.
Yeah, for sure. And Leslie Frazier spoke about him last week, talking about how, they brought him back because of his special teams prowess, but he's somebody who you feel comfortable can step in if something happens to a frontline starter. I think his position is all but solidified. The only thing that I think sucks for him is that his 2 best plays, arguably this preseason, the interception and the sack on Fields, both of them don't count on the stat sheet, which is unfortunate, but they still happen to the eye.
They count in my
film.
heart.
I
That's
saw him.
exactly, and that's all
I
that
seen
matters.
it.
I seen it. And if they count in Aaron's heart, then we all know it counts for realsies. But yeah, I love Andre Smith. I like Tyrell Dodson. And in an ideal world, I would like to keep 6, but as several people in the comments have stated already, with the Bills being a nickel defense, Taron Johnson is technically like the 3rd linebacker because we're in nickel all the time. You're looking at a 2 linebacker set. Every once in a while, they'll throw some base out there depending on personnel or maybe game plan. But I think that's the reason you can get away with 5. And I'm in the same boat. Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano, AJ Klein, Andre Smith, and Tyler Matakevich. And just to echo everyone's thoughts, I thought Matakevich was really good this preseason in actual defensive snaps. And Andre Smith, just, I don't want to say revelation, but just really surprised at his jump and his pop on the field and on film, and just a really nice piece to the point where, I came into this offseason thinking it was the same as last year, where we still are top heavy at linebacker, but if Tremaine or Milano go down, we're screwed again. But that's exactly right, if they do count in the film room. But yeah, now I feel a little better. The depth and the competition at linebacker has been interesting. To the point
Griff's
where
on a roll.
He's killing it. He's been on a roll for like a month and a half.
There's no such thing as dime. I hate everybody.
Hey.
Dime could be a thing. But yeah, to the point that even Mike Bell got cut after the first game, but he had some nice flashes and some plays. And Joe Giles Harris has made some plays and some, we've had guys in multiple ways making plays.
I could absolutely see Giles Harris get picked up by another team.
I guess I would like him to get to the practice squad, but I would not be surprised if he gets snagged. I mean, especially with what he did last year and how much he was revered, I guess, kind of in Jacksonville.
So I think that there is a 15th spot somewhere in this back 7. So we'll get to the numbers in a minute, whether it's, I think there's 5 linebackers, 5 corners, and 4 safeties that are all rock solid. And then whether it's a 6th linebacker, a 6th corner, or a 5th safety, there's one more spot in that back 7 for someone. I have it as Tyrell Dodson being the best player out of that group of the extra guys. I would like it to be a corner because I really would like another cornerback on this roster. But I just don't have anyone that I think, we'll get to that in a moment. So right now this is the first one where I was a little bit different than you guys. I had it as a 6th linebacker, not because I think our team needs 6 linebackers, but just because I think Tyrell Dodson's better than the extra guy at the other 2 spots, although there's a debate with that 5th safety. We'll see where that comes through. But right now, that's the first one where I kind of had it earmarked here. I'm going to mark it down as 5 linebackers, but we have ourselves an option of where we can fit one other extra spot in here, and we'll figure out where that goes in a minute. Aaron, we'll start with you. Who are the cornerbacks you have on this roster?
So I've got Trey White, my guy Levi Wallace, Dane Jackson, my guy Saren Neal, and I'm keeping Rashad Wildgoose on this roster. I think that he's got the traits that you want. I think the ability, whether or not he's going to be able to do it in real games, the ability to go inside and outside. Saren Neal's inside, right? Taron Johnson's inside. So you need some flexibility outside of Dane Jackson for a guy that can play both if you're going to have that next cornerback. And I think that he provides that. I think that he's going to be a guy that only gets better as the season goes on. He's real raw, but he flashes all the things that you want to see out of a cornerback. And so I think they have the time to develop him. Hopefully there's no substantial injuries here to Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson, because that changes everything. I think you got to make a trade or something if there's any type of substantial injury there. But that's my 6 is, again, White, Wallace, Jackson, Neal, and Wildgoose.
All right, we'll go to Anthony next. Do you have 5 or do you have 6?
Aaron, you did have 6 there, right?
Yes.
Wildgoose officially making it as a 6, and we're counting Saren Neal as a corner here.
It was tough. I was looking at, Greg, like you mentioned, whether going, 6 corners or 5 safeties. And even with the linebacker aspect as well, I recognize the case for Dodson. I just see corner as the bigger need in
Absolutely.
terms of overall, defensive alignment and roster construction. So yeah, I'm on the same level. Tre'Davious White, Levi Wallace, Taron Johnson, Dane Jackson, Saron Neal, and the Goose.
Okay.
He got burned and did not look good against Detroit. He stepped up in Chicago. He had some nice coverage downfield. I love the pass breakup where he read it in front of him and just stuck his arm in there and just ripped it out. We saw that aggressive point of contact play from him that he showed at Wisconsin, whether it was in the run game, whether it was in the pass game. And exactly to Aaron's point, I think he's someone who has the potential to grow over time. His inside outside versatility and just his ability to function in some level outside is enough, and I think he will continue to grow and develop. I also think he's probably a dude most likely that's a game day inactive, making the roster in that regard, but I think he did enough in that Chicago game. Granted, I hope he doesn't fall off the face of the earth against Green Bay, but I think he's done enough to show that he can contribute and develop. And again, it's really that position of need. I've been banging the drum for corner, not that I'm biased here, but for corner all off season. Shout out to
he's the only one with speed too.
That's also a factor. Like he's got that speed versatility, something we don't have, something that I don't know, a guy like Asante Samuel Jr. might have had if he had come to Buffalo, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. And I'm not upset about it at all. I don't think about it. I don't cry myself to sleep thinking about Asante Samuel Jr. in a Bills uniform. But yeah, so I got 6.
So Sterling, first I'll ask you for your 6, and then also, did you consider Nick McLeod, Cam Lewis, some of the other guys here into this group when you were paring yours down to either 5 or 6?
No, I have the same 6 as Anth up there. No, I didn't consider those guys. But Aaron, you made a good point about speed from Wild Goose, man. I think that's something that I don't think we've talked about enough this offseason. When we get into the thick of the season and maybe in the playoffs, when we see teams like Kansas City, can we match up? And I think that was one of the big things that kind of put a damper on our season last year. We weren't able to match up with speed. So having him on the roster. And then I also have a question, not to take it somewhere else, but do you think the play of the defensive line is going to make our corners even way better than what we think they are?
Yes. I think that it's a combination. I hate the debate of what's more important, pass rush or coverage. They are absolutely symbiotic relationships, and if you have elite coverage, it's easier for above average pass rush to get home. If you have an elite pass rush, I'll use Washington last year. Washington's secondary isn't anything special, but when you have just horses across the front getting home over and over again, it's easy to look pretty good in coverage. Miami's the opposite. Miami didn't have a ton of talent up front, but when you have really good coverage, you're able to get guys home more often. And I absolutely think our secondary, which is very experienced and very talented, is going to look better and look as good as they should, because we're going to get home on the pass rush more, and it's going to bring credit. I think there's going to be a couple more big plays and interceptions from Poyer and Hyde and Trey. This is the one where I struggled, in that I absolutely think cornerback is more important than depth linebacker. I can't get it out of my head that I think Terrell Dodson's a better football player than Rashad Wildgoose, and that I think he correct, and I think he could contribute on special teams today. I think he could play linebacker better than Wildgoose could play cornerback today. But I can't argue with Wildgoose brings a frame and an athleticism that we don't have at corner. We got some slight, not super fast guys at corner. Wildgoose is big and strong and fast, and we don't have that. And I do think that sways me, that 15th guy in the back 7 here. I think having a 6th cornerback spot is interesting, although there's one more guy in this discussion that's going to come up here in a moment. Anthony, lead us off for your safeties. I think it's the easiest one at the top end, but there's been a pretty healthy fight for this 4th spot.
Yes. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer. I think Jaquan Johnson is solidified as the safety 3. I'm disappointed that he's a little banged up, so he couldn't get some more real defensive snaps, but I think he's solidified as safety 3. And then it comes down to number 4 and or number 5. DeMar Hamlin has looked good at times. So is Josh Thomas. There were several snaps in the Chicago game where Josh Thomas was calling out backside coverage adjustments and telling DeMar Hamlin what to do, which isn't nothing considering how heady and cerebral DeMar Hamlin is as a player and the defense that he came from in college at Pitt. I like Thomas. I like Hamlin. I wrestled with, as I mentioned a minute ago with corner, I wrestled with the idea of keeping 5 safeties, but I did not. So I went Hyde, Poyer, Jaquan Johnson, and DeMar Hamlin as my 4th with the idea and the strong hope that Josh Thomas makes it to the practice squad.
Sterling, who did you have at safety?
So I actually have the same list, but I also want to mention DeMar Hamlin's willingness to play in the box, to kind of get to get dirty. I think that's really important when we consider these safeties. And Jaquan Johnson, as we know, is one of those guys too, but he's just better on special teams. So last year they went with 3 safeties, and I think this year's it's going to be 4.
Aaron, who did you have at the safety group?
Yeah, I'm with it. It's Poyer, Hyde, Johnson, Hamlin, and I agree. I would love to find a way to get Thomas back on this roster, but I agree. Hamlin and his ability to come up and play in the run and get in the run. When I look at him and when they drafted him, I saw a guy that's a poor man's Jordan Poyer and a poor man's Micah Hyde, that guy that is interchangeable and can kind of play both safety positions. And I think that he's a perfect guy to get in, develop, to take over those roles. One of those roles here in the future, because I hate to talk about it, but those roles are going to come up a little bit quicker than we'd hope they will. You're not going to be able to pay both those guys top safety money into the future for a long period of time. So I want to get Hamlin on this team and start to hand over that, get the knowledge of the game to him. So he wins out just for that reason alone. I think that he is the future at safety for the Buffalo Bills. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Jaquan Johnson guy long term. I don't think we have some secret Micah Hyde replacement on the bench. I think that he's a third safety, a special teams guy with more physical limitations than people realize. He's small and not fast, which is a rough combination.
He can function around the line of script. Like if we were to put him as a starter, he can function in the Poyer around the line of scrimmage role, but exactly to your point,
that Marlowe role.
Dropping him in the deep third to do Micah Hyde things.
He's the Sarah Neal of safeties.
Yes,
and bite your tongue.
But he is so from a skill standpoint, Neal is a far superior athlete to what Jaquan Johnson is. So, but Jaquan Johnson still brings an experience level that neither of the other guys have. My biggest trouble is, if you're telling me the way that Sean McDermott is wired and what he's watched Josh Thomas do in these practices and these preseason games, and you're telling me that man did not earn a roster spot, that is going to hurt Sean McDermott's soul to watch what that dude did and then to have to cut him. He was everywhere in the field in these games, in the snaps that he had. I agree in the similar sense to our conversations about Tommy Sweeney, about Tyrell Dodson, about Nick McLeod or Cam Lewis. I think we can sneak him. I think Josh Thomas is one of the first guys that gets brought back as one of the extra guys.
Sure.
As soon as you put whoever onto one of those IR spots.
Well, where are our numbers at right now?
So
we don't need a punter, right? We're not going to punt.
We're never going to
not if Hawk's going to be inconsistent like that.
Don't even get us started in. We already got the things going. People are going back to Corey Bojorquez as though he was consistent. By all means, I don't think that we found our punter for the next 10 years with Matt Hawk, but he's fine.
Can Josh Thomas punt?
Yeah, I'll find out. I bet you if you ask Isaiah McKenzie, he's pretty sure he can. We'll go through. Obviously, we have Bass, Tyler Bass, Matt Hawk, Reed Ferguson. With those, we are at 53. So let me go back through real quick here, and then I'm going to rattle off some names that were kind of on the borderline. Right now, we have 2 quarterbacks with Josh Allen and Mitch Trubisky. I literally typed Jake Fromm. Just I had to stop myself, and I'm like, that's not who we kept, but I typed Jake Fromm from just out of pure Freudian mistake. Singletary, Zach Moss, Matt Breida, and Tywan Jones. I'm going to keep those 4 as the running backs right now. Diggs, Beasley, Sanders, Gabe Davis, McKenzie, Jake Kumaro, and Stevenson as a 7th wide receiver right now. the 3 tight ends with Knox, Hollister, and the sneaky move of Gilliam. So right now, the first roster caliber player, in my opinion, we're exposing to waivers is Tommy Sweeney. I'm not going to count Antonio Williams. I think he's a pretty simple acquisition back on practice squad, but Tommy Sweeney, our first, I'll say, risk from that standpoint. I'm going to count it as 8 offensive linemen, and I think we're going to see a move of Tommy Doyle before we get to the 53-man. If he adds in as a 9th guy, that adds some complication here, and we'll get to what that would mean. I do have it as 7 defensive ends, including Daryl Johnson. I have it as 4 defensive tackles. I think it's going to be Zimmer and Phillips making it and Butler getting released. We'll see what happens with Phillips. I do think Aaron made a strong point that if you need to play around, and depending on the severity of Phillips' injury, that might mean that Butler makes it. And then as soon as they put Phillips on IR, you bring Zimmer back and you roll the dice that he doesn't get claimed. I do have it right now as 5 linebackers. I want to find a spot for Terrell Dodson. I have it as 6 cornerbacks, including Rashad Wildgoose, and then McLeod and Cam Lewis as priority practice squad guys. I have it as 4 safeties with Hyde, Poyer, Jaquan Johnson, DeMar Hamlin, and Josh Thomas as a priority practice squad, and then the 3 specialists. That gets us to 53. So now that brings
Super Bowl.
Obviously. Bills going to Super Bowl, and they're going undefeated. That's right. So right now, that means that, we obviously can guess pretty strongly that Isaiah McKenzie and Harrison Phillips move to the IR pretty quickly. I don't think either of them are gone for the season. I do think we're going to be without each of them for a couple weeks.
Dane Jackson getting an MRI is kind of sneaky.
Yep. I did not get a lot of discussion at all in that. So that cornerback depth,
I'm too scared to talk about it.
Well, that cornerback depth could be put to the test very quickly if we have multiple guys. Right? Heck, Taron Johnson had a cast on his arm. Why did
it was stated as a cast, and then it was stated as a wrap. So we'll see tomorrow.
Okay.
But
when I read that, I was like,
I'm trying to be optimistic.
How the hell did he get a cast on his arm? What is going on here? So as we go through those are some of the spots in that. Does Taiwan Jones have to be sacrificed because of the injuries at some of the other spots? If we're being sneaky like we are with Tommy Sweeney and Reggie Gilliam, that may be a requirement because of the injuries at some of these other spots. And right now, we don't know. I mean, everybody saw Stevenson doing the kind of, I'm going to say 3/4 speed ladder drill that we saw afterwards. He looked like he was moving okay.
My speed.
Yes, Aaron Quinn speed.
Yeah, full speed.
Full speed Aaron Quinn, which is like 30% speed Marquez Stevenson.
Correct.
We saw that ladder drill. I'm going to cross my fingers that means he could be the returner in week 1 or week 2 or week 1, because if it's not, we don't have a return man on this roster because Isaiah McKenzie pretty clearly
you bring
like
Sims back in.
So that brings up, where do we find that spot to be able to bring some of these guys in to be able to go through? I think that McKenzie is an easy one, and if he's not ready, you would actually IR both McKenzie and Stevenson. You use one of those spots to bring back either Brandon Powell or Steven Sims. I hope it's Sims because
But Sims didn't clear waivers because we wait. You know what I mean? The Bills got him, so he didn't clear waivers the last time. So it's not a guarantee that he'll get through waivers. Yeah.
Who else put in a claim on him as well?
Sure.
Any other guys here? So I know one of the assignments that we talked about was, kind of staking your claim. Who's one of the guys that you think a lot of the fan base or other people think are more likely to be cut, that you feel the most confident is going to make this roster? Anthony, if it's okay, we'll start with you. Is there any guy, I don't know that we had all that many hot takes tonight, to be honest. Is there any guy that you think others consider a fringe guy, a borderline guy, somebody who's going to be cut that you feel pretty confident is making this roster?
I think some people might. I don't think, to your point, my answer is going to come from the fact that I don't think a lot of these were hot takes or like surprising things, but I think a lot of people could see Rashad Wildgoose's name from us making the roster and being like, really? Especially if that like Detroit game is really sticking in your head there. I just think, it's all the points we made. He flashed well, his positional versatility, his athleticism, the the added element and layer that he adds to this defense and the uniqueness that he possesses in his skill set that we don't really have on our defense and in our secondary. That's funny. Well done, Jason. Yeah, so I would probably say Rashad Wildgoose just because I think that could be a name that people might see and be like, like initially. I don't know if they'd make
he
the
was
case
my
that he
biggest
should.
difference. Like I said, that was the only spot that
Yeah.
I had it at 5 corners coming in on my projections.
I would say
Sterling,
that as well, too.
Any names that stuck out for you?
Man, this may sound hot takey, but Matt Breida is somebody that we could see get cut just because the emergence of, I think, Devin Singletary's play this preseason, I think kind of makes Breida expendable in the sense if they wanted to go with Antonio Williams or kind of shuffle the deck a little bit. When you watch Breida, I mean, I know he brings the speed in, that's something that we don't have, but let's be honest, we haven't had speed in years. So I think he, I don't know. I don't know. It's one of those things that
I haven't
toss
seen
around.
anything from Matt Breida that screams to me we
Right.
have to have him.
Right.
I want to think that there's a way to harness his speed and to use it. I've seen enough reps that I also saw in Miami of him. His only
CJ
move
Spillering.
is get to the corner. It's his only move. It's his go. Now, if he gets to the corner, it's awesome. It's his only move. His only move is got to get to the corner. And if he doesn't get there and they string him out, it's a really impressive 2-yard gain. And he's out of bounds.
You saw the screen pass to him, which he showed the flash. And that's where I think to the point of unlocking the potential, even if he's on the roster for 5-6 looks at a play where Brian Dable can try to find him getting in space.
Dable being sneaky.
Yeah.
Matt Harmon saying we're not showing all the cards with Matt Breida.
I do think I don't want to see Breida line up and take traditional running back touches. Like that's not the role I want to see him in. But if you get him involved in a screen game or just out in space in some way, we saw what he can do. We saw the flash. But I agree that if these numbers get real tight, I don't know if you can justify 3-4 drawn up plays for him in a game, especially if McKenzie's healthy, because you're also trying to find ways to get him involved in those gadget plays. You start to run out of some of those gadgety type plays. But I'll go next in terms. I agree with Anthony about, I think a lot of people say Wild Goose is weird. And I think 2-3 weeks ago, my take on Obata, I don't think a lot of people were interested in seeing Obata because of the numbers. You just traditionally don't keep that many guys. But that's not a hot take anymore. Obata, I think, has done enough where he ruined what was going to be a hot take, and now everybody's on that train.
Yeah, I think you were early on that train, and now everybody's on there with you. He is absolutely a roster lock at this point. And in the chat, there were some of the questions. We've obviously seen it in the past that Micah Hyde is kind of our emergency punt return guy. I don't want him back there. I just don't like. I get it that he can go back and wave his arms and fair catch the ball, and that's fine. It's not the end of the world. Hell, Stephon Diggs could do that too. I don't want either of them back there. I don't want either of those guys in that situation. They're way too valuable to this team. So in a pinch for a week, if we think that it's Isaiah McKenzie for a week, sure, we can figure it out. Some people ask about Matt Breida. He returned a couple kicks, like 6 in college and like 2 for the 49ers his first year. So technically he's done it. I watched him do a couple reps of it, but that competition in the open practices was only Isaiah McKenzie, Marquez Stevenson, Brandon Powell. They were the only guys. The reason they signed Steven Sims today, which for anybody who hasn't seen it, Steven Sims is a electrifying athlete. He was undrafted, undrafted free agent, crazy fast, has a couple awesome highlights. He took a crazy jet sweep with like a couple broken tackles against the Patriots to the house, has a kick return touchdown that he kind of muffed and then picked it up and ran it for a touchdown. He's an interesting player that's inconsistent. There's a reason he was undrafted. There's a reason he got released. But there's been some investment by the Washington football team to get to that point that they could afford to let him go. And I think that was kind of a nod to him to let him go a little bit early to find a roster spot somewhere else when they had already invested in some other spots to have some people back there
He's
to be able to go through.
Yeah, he's who Isaiah McKenzie was entering his. I tweeted that out earlier.
Yes.
He's exactly the same thing. He's 2 years behind Isaiah McKenzie in his development, which is not a bad thing for the Bills to bring in, especially considering Isaiah McKenzie might be hurt.
Yeah. So tonight's been an awesome discussion. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Thank you to our sponsors at Underdog, to our sponsors over at Uncle Jumbo's. We're actually really excited. Aaron and I are going to be checking out some things, maybe going over. They're opening up a new tasting house that's going to be really exciting.
I like tasting.
They're getting into some things outside of vodka and actually going to be starting making a bourbon whiskey and some other things. It's going to be really exciting. Our friends over at Underdog, you can download the Underdog Fantasy app, use the promo code COVER1, get yourself $25 free if you do a $10 deposit. Great way to get yourself ready for fantasy this year. And we've actually just signed some new deals with a couple exciting additional sponsors. So I know there's a new sponsor coming for the Disguise Coverage show. We've got a couple new sponsors here. If you are interested in having some of the people that you've seen tonight, like Sterling over at the Hoof and Anthony over at Disguise Coverage, or Aaron and myself, and you would like us to talk about your amazing brands and to tell them about some very engaged fans to hear about your products, come and get a hold of us. We're open to additional sponsorships, and we want to be able to share the love and talk about all the good things going on to all of our fans. But we'll go around the horn here. Any final things, what you're looking for here this weekend, besides, please, Lord, don't let anybody else get hurt? What are we looking for at this Packers game? And then what are you going to be ramping up, getting ready for these cuts coming into Monday, into that Tuesday cut down day? Sterling, we'll start with you. What are you looking for in this game, and what are you excited about for cut down day?
Man, I just want to see Jake Kumaro play. I just want Brandon Beane to just dangle him like, hey, I got you. Like, that's honestly, I just want to be petty.
I respect it. I respect the heck out of it.
Yeah.
Anthony, what are you excited about this weekend?
I want to see Steven Sims. I'm nervous about the McKenzie and Stevenson injuries. I watched a decent amount of Washington football games over the last 2 years, having Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson on my fantasy team. So I tuned into them a lot. I saw some flashes, and his highlights are really fun, and I'm nervous about that returning spot. And then I'm going to continue to look at the young dudes in the secondary, both corner and safety. I think they'll get a lot of burn against Green Bay, and so I want to continue to see Wild Goose and McLeod and Elijah Griffin, and then the safeties with Hamlin and Josh Thomas, and see what we got.
And Aaron, what are you looking forward to besides seeing my smiling face sitting next to you at the Packers game this weekend?
Well, that's it. I'm excited to see you and enjoy, hopefully not too much sunshine. It's going to be hot there.
I'm going to wear my Sean McDermott bucket hat.
Yeah, I'm going to drink a lot of water.
But it's bad when I'm hiding my hair.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, actually, that you're going to be doing that. I'm with Anthony on this one, though. I'm really excited. I think I'm not excited with the injuries that we have at the cornerback position, but I think that those injuries, unfortunately, are going to allow these young guys to get a lot of burn here over the weekend. And so I'm excited to see how they hold up and see if that a Wild Goose can solidify that roster spot that we're talking about here, and see some of the other guys that are probably going to be on the practice squad that we won't get to see again for hopefully another year of their development. So, and again, just no more injuries. I can't deal with it. And then in terms of, after that game going in, I think Brandon Beane is going to be a busy dude. Joe Shane's going to be a busy dude. I think they're going to be scouring waiver wires. I think a lot of moves. There's going to be a lot of things that we don't even consider on this show tonight because we just don't know the possibilities. I think they're going to really look around the league at cornerback and try to improve the depth there, and maybe even a potential of a trade to get a guy in at corner. I don't think they're happy with the depth at that position. I could see a move being made. So I think they're going to be a very busy front office with a lot of phones ringing left and right, a lot of texts back and forth all day for them.
Absolutely. And you took exactly where my head was at. I want to see this young depth. I want to see another game from Josh Thomas, another game from DeMar Hamlin, more Wild Goose, more Nick McLeod, more Cam Lewis. I want to see, does anybody step up on the depth on the offensive line? We haven't been happy with that, but it was a little better in the second game. Even, obviously I drag Bobby Hart as much as anybody here recently. He was less embarrassing. He was decent against the Bears. So can we see a little more step forward there? Does Jameel Douglas make a claim for a spot? Does one of these other guys, does Jordan Debbie have a stronger performance where all of a sudden we have an option? I want to see if we get a little bit more from that standpoint. And then you get into, I want to see, does Brandon Beane have another trade in him? Does some of this get clarified that all of a sudden we don't have this jam up in some of these spots because we find a trade for someone we're not expecting?
Kumaro for Alexander straight up to the Packers before they leave town.
I'd take Jair Alexander. It's totally fine. I'd be open to that kind of move. We'll see where those things go. And I could see maybe a name we don't love, somebody we like at wide receiver, somebody we like at defensive end, where, hey, we need a tackle. We need a corner. We need one of those spots. And I don't want to trade away, Mario Addison or F.A. Obata. I don't want to trade away Jake Kumaro. But does that give us a chance to land a player at one of these other spots that we can go get? So we'll see where that goes. I don't know that player for player trades are not common. I would assume it would be a late round draft pick we would get for one of the guys we're going to release, similar to what we just saw with the Sony Michel trade over to the Rams. I'm curious to see where that kind of thing goes. We'll see what it ends up with, but I think that's really going to be exciting. Late Sunday night into Monday, getting ready for that cut down day on Tuesday. Are we able to unload a guy to pick up a draft pick? Are we able to scour the waiver wire and pick up somebody else? Or maybe we trade one of our late round picks for a veteran who's not going to make it off of maybe a Houston Texans or a Detroit Lions or a Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that is looking more to the future, but they have a veteran player that, would rather land on a spot like Buffalo. They open up some cap space. We are in a decent spot from that standpoint. We're not terribly limited. We could take on a normal contract, not crazy, but a normal contract of a veteran. Are we able to do that? And I'm excited to see where it goes. So thank you to all the fans. The chat, you guys have been awesome tonight. Really appreciate everybody. I thought this was a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. It's going to be really exciting to see where it goes. And it's great that instead of the problems we had for so many years of praying that this practice squad wide receiver comes in and saves the day, now we have guys that we're worried, how do we get all this talent onto the roster? How do we find a way to get all these guys on there? So on behalf of Sterling Furrowh, on behalf of Anthony Prohaska, Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Thompson. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we